his life. Alright, so while I'm waiting for people to jump into the chat, let's see what my fortune cookie says today. I'm still on the fence about whether or not you should eat these things, honestly. Oof. Although it's hard to say no to a good fortune cookie. Let's see. It says, a friend in the market is better than money in the purse. Okay. That's I guess I need a friend on Wall Street. Great advice. Yeah, totally actionable. Anyway, so let's do this thing. I'm doing some attacking chess today, which seems to be what people like to see around here, honestly. And I have to admit that I also like attacking chess. I'm partial to it. It's sort of my native strength in chess, if I can say that I have a strength in chess. And it's also like entertaining chess to see someone go on the attack and win. So we're going to see just two examples today. Sorry, I'm just trying to get myself all situated here. Alright. So we're going to see two examples. The first one is from pretty high level chess. It's from the World Youth Championship, I think, in 2018. I think it's the Cadets. And in the same year, I played a game that used the same motif, more or less. And we'll just go through like the thought process, like how you arrive at the move, and then how you accurately convert it to a win afterwards. Because, you know, sometimes finding a winning move is not good enough. You need to be able to bring home the full point. So this game that we're going to start with is Praggnanandhaa versus Kozak. In the past, I would be tempted to call this opening unambitious for white, and I'm still tempted to say that. But it doesn't mean that it's entirely without sting. Because once we reach a position like this, which is of course not forced, but you know it's pretty likely that something like this is going to happen because black's playing common sense moves. The play takes on a sort of King's Indian character. And I think that for black, the way to approach the King's Indian attack in general should be completely different from the setup that you see here with this pawn structure. I'm going to make a video about that later on, what I consider to be the most accurate move order to approach the King's Indian attack as black, and get at least equality, if not some advantage, pretty much every time. Yeah, that's for in case you were wondering why you don't see a lot of top flight players playing King's Indian attack all the time. In fact, I don't know if I can name anyone who does with any regularity against strong opponents. So, but if you're move order tricked into this, I think it seems like black was maybe move order tricked into this. Not that black's position is bad, maybe they even wanted this position, but I feel like this is not what black should be aiming for out of the opening, just from a theoretical standpoint. But, you know, if you are tricked into a position like this, then white's play makes some sense, because they can play as if it was King's Indian defense, up a move, and just try to sharpen the play, go for tactics, and in a must-win situation that could be good, even if it's not like the theoretical best way to press with white. Could give practical chances. So the first thing here you might be wondering is why in the opening white can just play e4 like this. And this is not really the topic today. The topic is a very particular sacrifice on f6 with a rook. Something that you can do whenever there's an open file. Open f file. But only works under certain circumstances. But, you know, it's still good to think about how we get to the training position. So, after knight takes e4, there's a pretty simple refutation, because black has spent 2 moves to take this pawn, right? And now this is hanging, this knight. You could take one of 2 approaches, I guess. You could try to play rook e1 and d3 and then take on e5, or you can just take on e5. Pick your poison. You could probably like calculate both to death and see which one's better. But let's just skip over that. I mostly wanted to show that knight takes e5 is a main idea. So bishop e7 is sort of a prophylaxis against all that stuff. But it doesn't defend against knight e5 and knight c6. It defends against rook e1. So here comes d3. This white should develop the pieces, why not? And here black would probably be slightly better if they could get this Morozze bind set up, where they put d5, make white take it, and then take back. I think this is generally slightly better for whoever gets this structure. Be it with the bishop on e2 or g2, it doesn't matter. And I'm also going to be making a video about how all the different ways that you can get a Morozze bind pawn structure with white and with black. So you guys can look forward to that. So here comes knight c3. And black chose d6. I haven't gone over this ahead of time, but I am curious about what happens if black just goes for it. Like, what dissuaded them? Because it looks to me like, in this position, if white goes for knight takes d5 and queen takes d5, black would be pleased as punch, even though they're being looked at by this bishop, because they could just move the queen out of danger. But I think that black has another interesting move here. And I'm wondering if it's working, so let me calculate it. And of course, if you're watching the recording, you can pause here and see if you can figure out what might happen here as well. What I'm noticing is that the knight on d5 is hanging. So I'm calculating knight takes e5. But the complication with knight e5 is that they can throw this in, so they are temporarily up a knight. If you just take back, they'll take on e5, and that's embarrassing. So you should play knight c6. And of course, they can't tolerate this. So we'll take the queen, take this queen. And now we have a position in which the knight on d1 and the knight on d8 are trapped. But black scored an extra pawn in the process. Black could desperado their knight either on b2 or f2. Neither of which are especially forcing, so we could even see like a double desperado where the knights like all come out. Like white could put their knight on either, they could sacrifice it on the same squares or try to put it on c6 to sabotage black's pawn structure. I would favor white in this position, just to show what we're looking at here. I don't really care where they go. Like if they play knight takes b2, I'll probably take... After knight b2, their knight is still kind of trapped long term, so I might play knight takes b7. Like, they can go knight here, but then I'm going to take this and take their rook. I don't think that's too greedy, because I don't see any useful moves for the bishop on c8. Like, if they go here, I'll just bring it back now. And this position is very nice for white. So this is sort of probably why black didn't go for this Morozze bind, because there's a specific tactical refutation for it right now. Can't go for it. Of course, I didn't check that with an engine, but it's a sort of typical motif, so I feel pretty confident in my calculation there. So Praggnanandhaa goes for knight d5, which is interesting, because it's sort of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation for black. Because if you take the knight, which is what happened in the game, then white gets more space and activity, because it opens the e-file, it takes over the e6 and c6 squares, it expands the scope of the bishop on g2. So even though white is getting doubled pawns, it does a lot for white. It also, even though it fills the outpost square, which is where it probably becomes a little counterintuitive for people who maybe were educated classically in chess. Usually you don't want to put your piece on the outpost square when it can be taken by a piece and you're forced to fill it with a pawn. But anyway, so that's what happens if they take, and we'll see more about that. But if they don't take, then there's this really beefy knight just hanging out on d5. And white could even, given time, arrange support for the knight such that they never have to put a pawn on d5, which could probably be even more dangerous. So they picked their poison. Maybe a sample line if we go for this. Hello, Shai. Welcome. You haven't missed that much. I was going pretty slow. We're just going over the build-up to the thing that we're talking about today, which is a sacrifice on f6. We have two examples of that. So this is just a sample. Like after bishop e6, I wonder how white should play here. They could snag the bishop pair by playing knight takes e7, but that alleviates some of the space issues that black seems to have. They could play c4, but that weakens the d4 square, so maybe not that. I mean, it also looks fine. I think it's all fine. Knight e3 looks interesting, but I think that gives black time to actually play d5 now, because they gained extra control of d5 in the last two moves. So I think the move would be c4 in this case. So they didn't want to suffer a knight on d5 to live, so they took that one. And after knight d4, black is seeking to trade off these knights, or at least put pressure on the knight with bishop g4, and just trade a lot of pieces and try to take advantage of the weak pawn on d5 at the endgame. Another thing that black might want to do here is play f5 and f4. So knight d4 is supporting that. Knight b8 was also possible, but this is way more active. Active doesn't necessarily mean good, though, because here white was not very cooperative. So if you want, you can pause here and find out what would white do here to avoid going along with the plan of trading all the pieces. So here, Praggnanandhaa played knight d2, not playing along. And the idea is next to play something like c3 and kick this knight, just bully it. So let's see what happens if black plays f5, which is the sort of active thing you want to do, right? Like, just keep going there. I think that after c3, black's coordination is not very good. They should go over here and maybe even throw in the move a4, because a4 is generally a useful move in situations like this, just to take up some space. Maybe like this. And here, I'm tempted to play f4. Just taking a lot of space all over the board and generally being a nuisance. And this prevents f4. So without f4, I think black's kingside play doesn't make that much sense. Probably they won't be able to get this light square bishop out on the king side. They won't be able to get the ball rolling with the knight. I think white's better here. So I think this is why not f5 here. So they played bishop g5, which seems pretty sensible. You want to trade off that bishop because it's bad. That's kind of it. But if there's one fewer pairs of pieces on the board, then black's space issues won't be so dire. So white's just saying I don't really care about that, and menacing the knight on d4. This is tactically stopping f5 because, again, after f5, here the knight's completely trapped in need of the f5 square. So that's a little tactic. It's key to take back with the bishop, though. If you take back with a queen, then there's knight b3. But really, that's not important to calculate. So b6, and whenever I see this pawn structure for black, I'm generally suspicious. I know that there are situations where it's okay, but usually when there's a pawn on d5 and this bishop is trying to go on b7, it's very, very difficult to activate this bishop. And because it's on the queen side, I think that's often a signal for white to go ahead and just attack on the king side. So b6, like stopping a5, it's a little bit of a passive reason to make a very committal pawn move. It doesn't mean that it's wrong, it's just that if you've reached a position where you need to do such things, I think something's gone wrong. So I already don't like black's position very much. That could just be my personal preference talking. So here comes f4, active stuff, and then knight e4, really nice move. Sort of bread and butter tactical stuff here. They can't take on g3 because the bishop takes g5. And the threat of getting rid of this bishop on g5 is pretty strong. It's really awkward to defend this bishop. So they just took the liberty of playing h6, at which point bishop takes f4 is coming with tempo. So now they take and take. Now white is very active at the moment. Piece is well placed, generally. So white's just improving a little bit more. And this is what I consider the critical moment of the game, and the idea that I want to examine today. So this one's white to play, and let's talk a little bit about attacking chess in general. There are some signals for when an attack should occur. An attack doesn't occur just whenever you want an attack to occur, which is what I often observe with students who are rated around, like, I was going to say 1500 and lower, but there's a lot of players who will just lean heavily into their tactical prowess and just try to make an attack happen by force of will. And I used to be a player like that because I was not educated on chess for a long time. And it turns out that chess is an equal game. There's a lot of numerical evidence to that effect. There's no solution though for chess, but when people are playing with chess engines or playing with all the time in the world, you know, like in the correspondence games, they at the top level, like if they're 2700 plus on ICCF, the cream of the crop correspondence server, 100% of their games end in draws. So, if chess was not a draw or equal in some way, you would think that there would be at least some variance, even at the top level, in the results. But no, it's 100% draws. In fact, I don't know why anyone at that level like really even plays that stuff. It's kind of like they're just finding new, novel, weird ways to draw the game. Now that aside, since chess is really equal, it doesn't make sense that you should be able to just go for the kill in any position without paying the price. So it's important not to attack like every single time that it crosses your mind that an attack can happen. There's some signals. One of the signals I already talked about. It's when some pieces are not well placed to defend the squares near the king, like specifically these squares. But also like this whole area of the board, not just the immediate vicinity of the king. Because a king hunt may occur, or maybe you're going to attack the king from really far away, like from like g4 and h5 or something like that. So all those squares are important. So whenever you see black's pieces or your opponent's pieces are not that well placed to defend the king, that could be a sign. Another sign is some kind of defect in the pawn structure. There's no safe place on the board, and there's no perfect pawn structure. But usually when I see a particular move played with the pawns near the king, some attacking ideas come to my mind associated with that particular move. Like here, I see h6, and you might think, okay, h6 is a fine move, people always play h6, what's the big deal? And yeah, in many positions h6 is fine, and I think it was probably fine when they played it in this game. More or less. But be that as it may, there are some attacking ideas that depend on this being the kingside pawn structure, and we don't really care that much about the rest of the pawn structure. The attacking idea has to do with this h6 pawn, because it becomes a target, right? If you can eliminate it for free, their king is permanently weak. So ideas to sacrifice to get that h6 pawn start to crop up, or because it's stepped forward, ways to take advantage of the weakened g6 square come up. So there are ideas that have to do with this. So their activity and also the structure near their king. And of course our own activity. If our pieces are like ready to roll, then it could just be that some tactical sequence is available. Another thing that matters, in my opinion, is space. If you have more space, attacking chess is way more possible. If you think about like the famous Greek gift sacrifice, it generally starts when white has more space. So, I think now's a good time to pause and see what we can find for white. There's some kind of fantastic move here that will lead to a big attack on black's king. So if anyone in the chat wants to figure out the variation and post it, then that would be pretty cool. Just a short variation, or at least an idea. Alright, so Shai's weighing in with knight f6. That's cool. Any other ideas from Shai or anyone else? There might be more options. Shai's observation that we have at least two more attacking pieces, and that's important because if you trade off everything, then you still need two pieces to mate at the end. I think that when you are attacking in the middle of the game, it's not as important to keep two pieces. That although there is a phrase that you need at least three pieces to mate, one piece to sacrifice a queen, and then something to support the queen. And that's true most of the time, but if we're thinking really out of the box, sometimes you only need one piece at the end to deliver the mate, if the board is crowded. Otherwise, yeah, that's true. Shai, you missed in your variation, which was knight f6, g takes f6, rook g4 check, king h7, that they have another more aggressive option to defend their king after rook g4. So you might want to look for that. And the fact that rook g4 is not possible, it makes sense that black held back on playing bishop b7 or bishop a6, because they probably sensed that some danger was approaching and they wanted to keep the light squares under control. Yeah, bishop takes g4. So that doesn't mean knight f6 is wrong, but you should check in and see what other options there are. Like after knight f6, gf6, you need to have something else strong, otherwise knight f6 doesn't make sense. Also, it's good to consider, if you play this very active move, what happens if they just don't take it? Like you play knight f6, they play like king h8, what's going to happen? Good morning, Eric. Welcome. We're just doing some attacking chess here, and we're trying to find the spectacular move. It's a pretty hard move to find. But it has to do with the fact that there are not really any pieces that can guard the dark squares over here. One thing that I like to lean on when I'm calculating in a position where the move doesn't immediately jump out at me is Ogard's 3 questions. And I made a video about that. So if you guys are curious to see an example and know more about the 3 questions, you can watch that video. But in summary, Jakob Ogard says that there are 3 questions that can really help you, just as a heuristic device, to find new ideas that you didn't see already. And that'll be, what's the worst placed piece for both sides? What are the tactical targets or weaknesses? I think he usually says weaknesses, and I usually say tactical targets because a lot of the people that I talk to about this think more in terms of tactical targets at that point. And also, what is your opponent's idea? So these 3 questions are really useful. And here, I think what are the weaknesses is kind of critical to finding the answer. But also, what is the opponent's idea, kind of? Like, what does black want to do? Whatever they want to do, you need to be able to handle that. And I think they have maybe 2 options that they're entertaining. One is sort of straightforward. They want to take this pawn and just try to use their brief initiative to consolidate on the light squares. Like play bishop b7 really fast and hopefully not lose anything. So that's an idea. It doesn't mean it pans out. It's just something that they want to do. And there's also maybe f5, which looks kind of dicey, but it would help to, even though it moves more pawns near the king, it's leaning into the fact that they're stronger on the light squares. So they're going to try to hold off the white onslaught by playing f5, potentially. So that's interesting. And there's a secondary idea associated with that. Like they might play f5, and then knight g6 and knight e5 with some activity. I think that is probably fine. But I still don't like black's position. Anyway, but there's a knockout blow. And the way that you find it also has to do with thinking about this particular weakness. That we would like to be able to play queen h6. So now we're hopefully getting closer with that hint. We need to do something, probably involving moving the rook, so that we can play queen takes h6. And no blunders, please. No rook g4. Rook h4 instead doesn't cope with one of black's ideas, Shai. So that's a good idea because you're saying maybe I will sacrifice on h6, which is generally, it could work in some other positions. But what about if they just play knight g6? Actually, knight g6 allows rook e6, does it? Hold on. I'm just checking. Well, whether that's possible or not, it probably is possible to allow the sacrifice. But also, you could just play knight f5, so it might look like this, and then you can't really stay. The knight is protecting. I think they'd be happy to repeat the position here. So rook h4 is not that impressive. So we need another way to clear access to h6. And keep in mind, our pieces are much more ready. Like, if you're asking the question worst placed piece, which is one of Overhead's 3 questions, for black, you'll see that this rook is very badly placed. And why is it badly placed? Because this bishop's also badly placed. So these two are like the really bad ones. You could argue for one of the two, but they're the worst placed pieces for black. Oh, instead of rook g4. Okay, so Shai was calculating this line. And it had this. But I think it has the same difficulty, that we can play knight f5 and consolidate. Another thing... hold on, is there another defense? I like to see sometimes if the defense is unique, because that tells me how much I need to really try hard to make that variation work out. Yeah, I think knight f5 is a unique defense. Probably there's only one thing to do, which is a good hint that if you can make them have this pawn structure, then their king will likely be difficult to defend. I want to make an interesting observation. Well, it's interesting to me. So we take for granted that the knight is weaker than the rook, right? We learned that probably on day 1 of chess, you know? People say, like, the king is lame but really important, the queen is the strongest and everyone loves the queen, rooks are pretty good, knights are not as good, and bishops are probably better than knights is what people say, although that's super debatable. And then people will dunk on pawns. No one doubts that pawns are pretty weak. But, like, why is the knight weaker than a rook? Why would I rather sacrifice my knight and not sacrifice my rook? The limitation of the knight compared to the rook is that the knight has less mobility, right? It can't cross the board easily. But if we're attacking the king, do we care about crossing the board? Probably not. Yeah, so Shai has the right idea. It starts with rook f6. So let's start calculating this move, because this is really good. After rook f6, we have to ask ourselves a couple questions. Number one, what if they don't take it? You know, we should never assume that our opponent will accept our sacrifice, especially here, because we're not even taking anything, right? It could just be that we're, you know, hanging a rook there, and they'll just keep going on with their merry lives. I'm assuming that Kozak had a merry life. They were, after all, playing in a World Cadet tournament. That sounds pretty good to me. So what if they don't take it? And also we should know what our follow-up is if they do take it. So let's start with the forcing option, right? Actually, let's start with the what if they don't take it, because I feel like the sanity check is usually more economical when you're playing a fast game. So let's say they don't take it. What would happen after that? Any good moves for black? How about knight d5? What's the refutation there? No, not knight takes d5. Oh yeah, for black that's probably what they would do. But then how do we deal with this? Okay, so Shai says rook takes h6. Any other options, or is that the only thing? Like, do we have to play rook h6? after rook takes h6, first of all, I'm tempted to just take it, but I think that black also could possibly consolidate by just retreating. They could just like play bishop b7 or something like that. I'm not that confident that that's true, but you know, it seems like black has more options than they deserve. Rook takes d6 is more convincing to me, because here, even if we don't want to attack their king anymore, which is still possible, because after they move the queen, we could just go take on e6 if that really does work out. But you know, even if that is not the case, we could just take this knight on d5. And I think the attack just keeps going. Like a sample line might be, let's say I'm playing queen c7, because if I go queen e7, then maybe rook e1 will be difficult one day. Okay, I take this. And they need to develop their pieces fast, so they play this one. This still looks very dangerous. White's just up a piece and attacking the king. So this kind of variation is pretty convincing to me, that like I can take a piece and keep attacking if I play rook d6, so why should I go into the complications of what happens here, where they can play like probably queen e7, no, not queen e7, because I need that square for my king probably, maybe queen c7. Maybe this, yeah. Hold on. Maybe it's okay. Let me check this a little bit more accurately. Bishop d5 is coming, so maybe it's actually, maybe it's winning anyway. So maybe they shouldn't take it. And the other thing that I said might make more sense, which is this one. So then we might see this. Sorry, I'm kind of just fact-checking here, because if this wins on the spot, that would be interesting. Although in a practical game, I'd probably still play rook d6. I'll probably choose e7 here, because if they play rook e1, I play f5. And if they move the knight, I play queen d6, so that should be fine. So here I'm going for f5. Yeah, I think bishop b7 is probably the way to go. Anyway, we don't need to analyze this like to death, because we just know that rook d6 is winning as well. So it's more like just curiosities. For curiosity's sake, we're checking that one. So that's rook f6 if they don't take the rook. So now, let's say that they do take the rook on f6. Actually, briefly coming back, because Shai said knight g5 looks strong. That was in this line. Here, I don't think it's that strong, because you can take the rook now. If this isn't what you meant, we could come back to this a little bit later on. Or maybe even, well, in this position, that's already winning, of course. That's based on a blunder from black. So anyway, let's see, what happens if they take back? Well, not take back, but just take the rook. I think knight takes f6 is like an obvious reply, but that doesn't mean we should automatically play it. Like, what's going to happen? If we play knight takes f6, it's check, which probably feels very satisfying, because everyone loves giving check. But after king g7, we are kind of failing our mission, because the way I understood it, when you play rook f6, your mission is to disrupt the pawn structure so you can play queen h6. And king g7 defends that. So just because it's forcing doesn't mean you should like calculate it to death, in my opinion. It's good to start your calculation on a good footing with some candidate moves at the beginning, so you know like where the promising directions are. So After rook f6, we may as well go ahead with it a little bit. Here, we don't play knight f6. After king g7, white is actually dead lost. I don't think they even have counterplay for a draw. Just so we can see on the board. If they play like knight h5, first of all, this is playing for a draw. I'm wondering if I could even play king g6 here to avoid the draw. It's kind of interesting. Because you can start attacking my king like a little bit, like this. But I think it runs out pretty fast. So yeah, I think that's probably the precise way for black to avoid a draw here. But if they want a draw, they can just take it. They can play king g7, king h7, because there's no attack here. Like, so knight takes f6, king g7. Again, knight g4 is not possible because of this bishop. With this check, I don't think white has a reasonable move to continue, because if you play something like this to try to like bring more pieces to the attack, which is logical, I think black has a good defending move here. So Shai's on the right track about what the best move is, but what do you guys think the defending move should be for black in this position? So the idea in this position, as I see it, is to play like rook f6, attacking h6, and then bishop e4. Or maybe just rook f6 is good enough. One line here, like let's say black plays something absolutely bonkers, like a6, just for a sample. Yeah, Shai, you got it. Just as a sample, we go here, and after like, so the reason that bishop e4 is important at all, and we're not just winning like this, is we need to throw this check in order to have this kind of mate threat. And here you have a luxuriant choice of how you can checkmate them. I don't know which one I like more right now. Maybe this one, just to highlight the bishop's importance. Anyway, that's just a little sideline. So that's white's idea, but f5 stops all of that, as Shai has already pointed out. And Shai also pointed out that in this position, we shouldn't even be calculating this. That's just like show and tell. It's fun, it's interesting, but it's not what you should be calculating in the middle of the game. You need to be economical. Queen h6 is the cat's pajamas, because we're threatening knight f6, which wins the game on the spot, if they permit it. But there's still some more calculation to do, because they have a defending move. So let's see if you guys can find the defending move and also maybe the refutation. Threat is knight f6. I think there's only, well, maybe there's two reasonable ways to try to avoid, but probably, I don't know, one of the avoiding ways only occurred to me now, so probably it's not good. Yeah, knight f6 would win here, but what should black play to defend? And then, I think Eric meant knight g6. Yeah, that's true. So knight g6 is the defending move. They could also play knight d5, but I think knight d5 is worse because it gives white extra options to win material. So let's consider knight g6 the only option for now. Functionally the same. We're just trying to protect the f6 square with the queen. So how do we overcome this resistance? We can't just give up here. We can look at knight takes d5 since Shai was suggesting it, but let's focus on this one first and then compare. So knight g6. And how do we keep going? I think the three questions are useful again here, if it's not immediately jumping out at you. Depending on where you're at with your training, this move could be like an automatic move, where it's just like, it's the only thing worth considering, and you know it, so you play it. Or it could be like a tactical move where you've calculated a little bit, and it just comes out of your calculation that this is winning by force. Or if you're not calculating at that level, you could answer what to play here by asking, what is your worst place piece? Rook f1 is the best move. It's not slow. The reason it's not slow is because it's a lot slower for black to bring their pieces to defend the king. It's impossible. So they go here, we play rook f1, and there's maybe one discouraging thing, but you should probably try to push through and make it work. Because this is very promising, right? We're bringing another piece to the attack, and the only way for them to defend here is with a passive move. So it's very promising. I wouldn't give up just because it looks slow. Black can play f5. That's the only move. I think it's the only move. It's interesting, Shai, that you said h4 seems better, but to me, h4 seems really slow, because h4 doesn't even carry a threat. Also, on principle, it's a move that weakens your king, but that doesn't really matter here. After h4, I think I would play... Let me see, what would I play? Yeah, I would still play f5 after h4. Yeah, Eric has it. So knight g5 after f5. So this is the full line. Knight g6, rook f1, f5, knight g5. That's it. There's nothing more to really see here. Because even if making a space for the king helped, it doesn't. But your king is still on the lamb here. Anyway, it's mate in this particular example, but, you know, just generally speaking, even if they could escape, like if they could sacrifice a piece to run out, white's pieces are way more active. Like, they're definitely going to get something here, even if you can't see it to the end. So, that's the whole line there. So, black chose another way of not taking the rook. He played knight f5. And they struggled on for a while, and this is a really, really good option. It makes a lot of sense because they're protecting h6. But after g4, everything's kind of coming down because they have to take the rook now. After gf5, they don't have any defenders for the king. They had to play king g7 again to protect h6. And after knight g3 and rook f1, white is much better. I think that their play was not that precise after this, but I'll still show because it's interesting. The main feature though is this transformation, where we give the rook to ruin their pawn structure for really long-term and relatively easy play against their king. So knight g3 is just, you know, going in for knight h5. But here he chose king h1 to try to bring the rook to g1, I guess. I would have chosen king f2, personally. But, you know, I wasn't playing in the World Cadet that year because I'm an adult. So after rook g8, I think black has enough play to hold the balance. Like, if we play rook g1 now, it's probably, like, too slow. I think we should be going for something like this. Maybe. Or, alright, I'll show the line that I thought. So after king f2, I thought they would play something like rook e8. And after queen f4, queen e7, they're going to try to trade the queens. And that white has to go for a better endgame here. I think this is a really good defense for black. If they go for, like, rook g8, I'm going to play rook e1. And this depends a lot on what black actually does, but I feel that I have some compelling options. Like, if black tries to defend the king side really aggressively, I might be able to get my rook into e7. So I think I would keep going with queen f4 here. It depends on what black does. Like queen f4 and maybe knight e4 and then take on d6. I think that's probably the most ambitious way to go. Just going for the endgame. But anyway, so Praggnanandhaa kept going for the attack instead. And I guess it checked out. Kozak just kind of tilted here and gave the rook. I don't know why they did that. I would have gone for b5, trying to activate the rook. And so now white just has a better position for a long time, so I'll just show kind of the rest. Praggnanandhaa improved his pieces one by one, which was really nice to see. Right, he just consolidated the whole pawn structure, activated everybody, including the king, and then started attacking that weakness again. So the h6 weakness is the central theme. They could have just resigned here, but you know, they're trying. A whole lot of improving going on here. Yeah, then they resigned here. So the sacrifice is what led to this winning endgame for white on f6, and then the weakness of the h6 square. So, and let's go back to that moment where this happened, right here. So, in the same year, I think, I played a very similar sacrifice, which just goes to show that this thing happens often enough that you should pay attention to it. And it wasn't even in the same opening. I think sometimes people think that certain things only happen in certain openings. And to some small extent that's true, but not like tactical or broad strategical ideas. So this is a game against my good friend Matthew O'Brien, whom I have not seen in some time. So Matthew, if you see this, shoot me a message. I know he's out there somewhere. So we played a Nightorf. This was a relatively casual rated game. So in that sense, it was not casual at all. But you know, we were playing not in a like huge tournament. We've played several times, and interesting games every time. But this one was a rapid tournament. So, well, not a rapid tournament per se. Like it affected standard USCF rating. It might even have been FIDE rated. I don't remember. But you know, it was a pretty fast tournament for what we normally play. I think normally he and I play these like big weekend warrior Swisses, although I'm not that interested in doing that these days. Anyway, so I think bishop h4 was not like my normal secret sauce, and because I put a note here, I haven't looked at this in a while. I put a note here about taking on f6 and playing queen d2. So I think that might have been what my prep actually was, but I played bishop h4, which is interesting. So we're going for this, actually no, sorry. Bishop f6 was an option I was entertaining, but bishop h4 is like the main move here for me. So he goes for queen b6, which is fun and interesting. It's like a poison pawn variation. And I played bishop e2, which is kind of weird because e5 transposes to the main lines of the poison pawn. And I had actually seen this position in the same week. Coach Luis, who's another good friend of mine who frequently shows up in the chat and in the Discord and everything, he and I sat down earlier that week before we were teaching, because we were both teaching chess at that time, and we said, let's just play one casual game, just for fun. We're both like really tired and everything, and so of course we played this obnoxious poison pawn variation, like the sharpest game that we could possibly play, and we're both like stressing, like trying really hard to win, like right before class. It was like really funny. We were just trying to relax, and it didn't work because our games are always chaotic. But we got this position on that day, so I should have remembered, but I didn't at the moment. I just, for some reason, wanted to play bishop e2. But anyway, just a little sneak peek here. This is one of the main lines where you play bishop e2 only after you've played e5 and broken the center and opened everything up. So I played that without doing so. So he went ahead and played knight c6, which is interesting because it's kind of fighting against the move e5, but it doesn't abandon the possibility of putting a piece on d7, like this knight, for example. So I went ahead and chopped that one off, which he was probably somewhat grateful for, now that I think of it, because it means that now he can maybe move this bishop without losing the b pawn. But he would still lose the b7 square. So it's still very double-edged and everything. And I castled, the reason being that I wanted to play like e5 like normal, but after knight d5, knight takes, pawn takes, and castles, I didn't feel like white really had much going here, but maybe I was just underestimating white's position. It still seems like solid, maybe playable. Alright, probably no one has ever called like any knight arc position solid, but there, I said it. One of the interesting tactical details that I did not really think about at the time is that I think it's not possible to take this pawn without incurring the wrath of chess itself. That could end up in a puzzle sheet sometime. So anyway, I went ahead and castled. I didn't play very well in the opening here, but I knew what I was going for. I had a very strong feeling about what I wanted. Maybe that's an overstatement, because I also was burning a ton of time on the clock during this game, which was sort of characteristic of me at the time. I think now that I'm getting back into chess, I'm a lot faster. So anyway, e5, calculated risk. I want to open the position and do something. I think I have to. The reason it's a calculated risk and not just like a good move that I'm playing is because of this move, queen c5. The e-pawn is going to go away, so I had to play bishop f2 and take, and I calculated this for counterplay. And now you can see the resemblance with the Praggnanandhaa game, because it's coming, right? The rook is now attacking on f6. And here black had to find a tactical way to deal with the immediate capture on f6. But it was easy for him. I think probably he could have just moved his queen as well and been fine. But he quickly played this, probably just because it's flashy, and like knowing Matthew, I think he really likes moves like this, where it's sharpening the play. And he might lose some of his objectivity in positions like that, which I knew. I knew he would play this move. So I was happy to take, even though I'd lost all my pawns, because now what I have here is a position with, I was going to say a superior structure, which is funny because it's like saying that no structure is better than the structure that black has because of these holy pawns. What I really mean is active pieces. It's not like my structure is better, but I have free reign of where to put all my stuff. And here, I think he should probably play a move like queen e7, I think. I don't really remember what I thought at the time, but this is the move that comes to me now. At which point, I think there's a lot of play for white. But he castled, which is a mistake. And now, after seeing the Praggnanandhaa game, I'm sure you guys can all find the sequence for white. So If you're watching the replay, you can pause here. But this is our critical moment. What should white do here? It's the same structure. It's the same open file. It's the same material balance, more or less. It's the same problem that this bishop is like shut out from the action. By the way, I had not seen the Praggnanandhaa game when I played this. I only found it later when I was kind of looking for content. Which is probably a way of saying being a degenerate chess player and spending way too much time looking at chess games. But the move should be rook f6. And when the square is empty, rook f6 is good. So here, when there's a knight on f6, it's even better. And he seems very stressed at this moment. Yeah, rook f6, that's right. But the question now is, like, what happens if they take? Which I actually didn't even put in my notes, it looks like. Sorry, Shy. I was trying to do the opening expose and get us to the critical moment. Which is probably a signal to walk away from your keyboard when I start going on. So if we play queen h6, right? They are probably going to play a defending move. And that doesn't look good. So what else can we do? This is actually much harder than the Praggnanandhaa position, I think. So Erica's knight e4, he said knight d4, but I think he means knight e4 as an intermediate move. So let's say we go for that, okay? So we go here. Yeah, Shai, you found out the problem with queen h6, that's true. So let's look at this one. Knight e4 is like a logical next step when you see that queen g5 is coming, because it stops queen g5. But then the issue is what happens now, because it gives them a free move with the queen. It seems a little counterintuitive, right? So they have to defend this pawn, right? So let's say they defend it like this, because they might want to come back and guard their king side. I guess you guys have an idea of what to do here. Well, actually, after queen f5, probably... Yeah, okay. This is still a fine move. I was wondering if white had extra options, but I think the answer is no. Queen e5 is also on the table, but let's look at this one. How do we continue here? Our knight's hanging, they're defending f6. It's a good puzzle moment. Bishop d3 is interesting. After bishop d3, I think they would play king g7 to stop the threat of knight f6. At which point, maybe knight g3 is good. Knight g3, queen g5. No, queen g5 is a strong move. So I think that probably bishop d3 is losing like this. And this is not really spicy enough. I was thinking to play knight h5, but the queen is doing just fine with all that jazz. So I don't think that's working. It could even be the case that rook d8 is stronger because we're threatening queen e4 and rook d2. And that would eliminate like all of the counterplay. The only thing I'm wondering is... No, rook d8 is not good because of queen h6. So I think king g7 is still the best. The logical move, where we're just protecting the weakness. So bishop d3, maybe not. Another thing that people have recently been calling this the Shankland rule, even though people have been saying it for like forever. If you have an idea that you want to play, you should ask yourself, what happens if you just play it anyway? I think it's funny that they're calling it the Shankland rule. I think it's sort of an early career move for Shankland, even though it's like Dvoretsky and Ogard and like various other coaches over time have been proponents of this psychological technique. You know, if you want to play queen h6, what happens if you just play queen h6? Alright, rook f1, it looks like it was more on Shai's mind. So after rook f1, I think they will play queen e4. So did you have a follow-up there? This one doesn't look that promising to me. It's still kind of interesting because maybe you could play like this. But I'm curious. I wonder if I can even play c5 here and like get bishop d7 really fast. Because I think this doesn't carry a threat, strangely enough. Like they've lost their whole... Oh, actually it does. If you can play queen g... If you can play rook h6, queen g5 might do something. Yeah, I should probably try to change the latency. Sometimes, like when I update stuff, my latency goes back. It's kind of annoying. Rook f1 and the bishop d3 line he was saying. Let's go back to that. Rook f1. Oh yeah, maybe rook f1 is good here. I'm still not totally convinced, but it does look pretty promising. Yeah, maybe bishop d3 is actually good. Okay, what I chose leads to mate though, so maybe we can just take a look at that quickly. Bishop d3 looks it's like interesting, but I think there's a lot of analysis to do. So after queen h6, I think it's kind of just lights out. This is the most forcing line, so I think you should really see this kind of thing first when you're training. I always go for the forcing lines first instead of considering other stuff. But I guess bishop d3 might have looked kind of forcing. But here, it's very direct. Like, I'm just playing knight f6. And it's going to be mate. If I'm allowed to do that. So, they only have one move here that makes any sense. And it's queen e4. So this is just a one-move calculation so far. Definitely has to come to your mind first. So now here, what's the key move? Like, why is it okay to give up that knight? Just mate on a7. So that's the key. They don't have any move with the queen that protects the h7 square. So that's it. They can just resign here. So my opponent saw this, and for that reason, Yeater Master got it. Yeah, nice. Yeah, so for that reason, my opponent played e5, which is very logical. He's trying to get this bishop out so that he can defend his king. And the rest of the game was very sloppy because I spent a lot of time to reach this position. And I just kept the funny thing about this game is I just kept that rook there, like, the whole time. He just couldn't take it because it would lead to that structure that we saw was really bad. Queen e2 doesn't make as much sense because I really should have been keeping the pressure on h6. So here I should just take. And I had been calculating it, but I think I overcalculated. I was kind of worried about f5. But after knight c3, like, what's the problem? There's no problem, you know. Their king is just weak, and they're down material. So I was, I don't know, stressing for nothing. Which was pretty typical for me back then. And I still have issues with stress, I guess. So yeah, he started just going for counterplay, and I still managed to finish things off properly. Knight g5 was a time pressure mistake. I just dropped it on the wrong square. I meant to put it on f6. The attack just rages on. So I didn't play that well here because I had very little time left. And my opponent's pretty fast. He usually plays relatively well, even in time pressure. And he always gets people into time pressure, I think, because he's pretty well prepared. And he's an intuitive kind of player. Right, so anyway, I went for this attack. I sacrificed my rook on f5. And they should have sacrificed here because, you know, I would have to go for this. So even in the time pressure, I was losing my advantage. So probably I should take this with check. Maybe not queen g7, just to, like, keep things complicated. Like that. Anyway, that would be a big comeback for black, but he played here and resigned. Because he's going to lose that queen, and that's going to be really bad. Like me. So, this was my game that was using the same pattern. For mine, I think the first move was maybe more obvious because people all know about the exchange sacrifice, right, where you give up your rook for a knight to open the king. Whereas in Praggnanandhaa's game, there was no piece on f6. But it's the same concept. Like, black has the same developmental problems. They have the same structure on the king side. White has all the same, like, activity and piece composition. So, I think it's interesting how they compare. So, I hope you guys like that. And I think I'm done for now. And you guys can look forward to a few other things coming up. Like, we have... I'm still doing the series on opening refutations. I also might do a series on, like, the basics for openings, like why the first few moves of the main line are what they are, and we just go into, like, the tactical reasons for those things, like in the Spanish or the Scotch or whatever. So that's coming up, and I have a couple more live stream lessons in the queue, so you guys can look forward to all that coming up. And if you guys like that, and you're not already in the Discord, you should join it. And hope we're getting very close to 1,000 subscribers. So thanks to everyone for their support, and I hope that more people will join in to our community so we can all study together. So until next time, thank you and take care.